Welcome to Key Talking Points.
The podcast that makes learning effortless.
No fluff, no jargon, just clear, engaging explanations.
We break down complex topics so you don't have to.
Let's get straight to the point.
Visit keytalkingpoints.com for more.
The concept of press freedom is foundational to democracy. At its core, it's the right to publish information without interference from governments, ensuring accountability and transparency in public and private sectors.
And when you say without interference, you're talking about governments allowing publications to make their own decisions, right? Like not dictating what can or can't be printed.
Exactly. It's a principle enshrined in documents like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which states that everyone has the right to seek, receive, and impart information through any media, regardless of borders. This was a big step forward for press freedom globally.
Right? And before such declarations, I imagine it was a much, much different story.
Absolutely. Historically, many countries had restrictive laws. Take Britain, for example. Until 1695, newspapers required government licenses to publish. When that licensing system collapsed, it was a pivotal moment. The press could finally operate independently.
And Sweden then made it official with its Freedom of the Press Act in 1766, didn't they?
Spot on. Sweden's act was revolutionary for its time, establishing press freedom in their constitution. It remains an example of forward-thinking governance.
But here's the thing. Press freedom is still such a fragile thing, isn't it? I mean, some governments are terrified of independent media. Why is that?
Authoritarian regimes see an independent press as a threat because it acts as a watchdog. It exposes corruption, challenges their narratives, and informs the public, empowering them to demand change. For such governments, controlling information means controlling power.
It makes sense now. So, when you hear that certain countries rank low on global press freedom indices like North Korea or Eritrea, well, that aligns perfectly with what you're saying.
Exactly. In those countries, the state tightly controls all media, shutting down criticism or dissent. They often operate with propaganda to maintain their control. A free press disrupts that system. This control over the press by authoritarian regimes has real consequences, and press freedom isn't just a concept, it's a dangerous reality for many. In 2023 alone, more than 300 journalists were jailed globally.
That's appalling. I mean, these are people risking their lives, right?
Exactly, and the reasons for their imprisonment vary. Some are jailed for exposing corruption, others for merely reporting the truth. Take Turkey, for instance. It's one of the worst offenders, holding more than 120 journalists in prison in a single year. That's not about justice, it's about silencing dissent.
And the methods of control go beyond just locking up journalists, don't they?
They do. Many authoritarian regimes rely on state-controlled media. Take China, for example. Most of their media outlets are either directly controlled or heavily influenced by the government. It ensures that the state's narrative is the only one people hear, filtering out independent or critical voices entirely.
And that must mean self-censorship is rife too. I mean, if reporters know the risks, they're going to hold back.
Absolutely, and that's one of the subtle but devastating consequences. Even when journalists aren't imprisoned, they face threats, intimidation, and surveillance. It creates a chilling effect where many are too afraid to speak out.
Which is heartbreaking, isn't it? Because journalism, when it's independent, has the power to hold the powerful accountable.
It does. A striking example is the story of Daphne Caruana Galizia, a Maltese journalist. She exposed corruption at the highest levels of government. But her work cost her life. She was assassinated in 2017, her car rigged with a bomb.
Oh, that's horrifying.
It was a message, plain and simple. Exposing the truth can make you a target. Daphne's story is a stark reminder of the risks journalists face daily, often fighting battles we rarely hear about.
But despite the risks, so many carry on, don't they? It's almost like this unshakable need to bring truth to light.
Exactly, and that bravery is what keeps societies informed. But it also exposes how fragile press freedom really is in the face of authoritarian control. While press freedom faces significant challenges globally, technology has emerged as both a tool for empowerment and a complication for independent journalism. Over the last few decades, innovations like satellite TV and internet-based platforms have radically transformed the media landscape, enabling information to cross borders instantly.
Right, and while that's opened up so many opportunities, it's almost like we've unlocked a double-edged sword, hasn't it?
Exactly. While these advancements enable unprecedented access to information, they've also introduced powerful new tools for censorship. Take the internet, for instance. It was once heralded as a beacon of free expression, but now governments are increasingly leveraging it to control narratives.
Like how some authoritarian regimes block or filter content entirely.
Absolutely. China is a prime example with its Great Firewall, a sophisticated system that censors information and monitors internet usage. In other places, like Iran, entire sections of the internet have been shut down during protests to silence dissent.
That's terrifying. And it's not just physical control, is it? I mean, social media algorithms can amplify government propaganda while suppressing independent voices.
Spot on. Platforms meant to empower individuals often find themselves manipulated into tools for misinformation or suppression. It's a new battleground for press freedom.
So, where does this leave journalists? Are things, well, getting worse overall?
Unfortunately, the numbers suggest so. According to the 2023 World Press Freedom Index, press freedom is declining worldwide. Out of 180 countries, more than 130 were classified as having severely restricted or no press freedom at all.
That's a staggering majority.
It is, and it reflects not just overt controls like imprisonment or violence, but subtle methods too: economic pressures, enforced self-censorship, and disinformation campaigns. Journalists are being targeted in their homes, at their workplaces, and even online.
But there are organisations fighting against this, aren't there? Groups that push back and advocate for journalists?
Thankfully, yes. Organisations like Reporters Without Borders play a critical role. Their annual reports and rankings, like the Press Freedom Index, shine a spotlight on oppressive regimes and celebrate countries that protect independent journalism. It's these watchdogs that keep the conversation alive.
I love that. I mean, without these groups rallying behind journalists, it'd probably be even harder for their voices to survive, let alone reach us.
Completely. And their work reminds us that freedom of the press isn't just about journalists. It's about all of us. It's about creating informed societies and holding power to account. After all, when the press is free, so are the people.
And protecting it isn't optional. It's mandatory for democracy to work.
On that note, this wraps our deep dive into global press freedom and the incredible people fighting to protect it. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you. If you're inspired by what you heard today, consider supporting independent journalism in your area. We'll catch you next time.